Welcome to the day. We start in Washington with a new plan to supply Ukraine with weapons. US President Donald Trump made the announcement during an Oval Office meeting with NATO chief Mark Rutte. Under the deal, the United States will supply Ukraine advanced military equipment bought and paid for by other NATO members. President Trump also promised to impose severe tariffs on Moscow if there isn't a deal to end the war in 50 days. The US president, who was once a great admirer of Vladimir Putin, said he was disappointed with the Russian leader's refusal to come to the negotiating table. Now he's getting tough on Russia while green-lighting military support for Ukraine.
And we've made a deal today, and I'm going to have Mark speak about it, but we've made a deal today where we are going to be sending them weapons and they're going to be paying for them. The United States will not be having any payment made. We're not buying it, but we will manufacture it and they're going to be paying for it.
So I've been in contact with many countries. I can tell you that at this moment, Germany massively, but also Finland and Denmark and Sweden and Norway, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Canada, they all want to be part of this. And this is only the first wave. There will be more. So what we will do is work through the NATO systems to make sure that we know what Ukrainians need, so that we can make packages.
And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple. And they'll be at 100%. I don't want to say he's an assassin, but he's a tough guy. It's been proven over the years. He's fooled a lot of people. He fooled Bush. He fooled a lot of people. He fooled Clinton, Bush, Obama, Biden. He didn't fool me.
Let's bring in Torrey Taussig. She's a former NATO policy advisor at the US Defense Department. She's currently a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, focusing on transatlantic security. Welcome to DW. Donald Trump says he's happy to send weapons as long as someone else is paying for them, which sounds like a good deal for the US, good for national security and good for business.
That is correct. So President Trump announced today that the United States will provide Ukraine with Patriot air defense systems. It sounds like it will be the full capability, so launchers, radar, command and control missiles, but that these weapons will be provided via European allies that pay the United States for these systems and then donate them to Ukraine.
Right. And do you see that as being effective from Ukraine's perspective? Because just looking back over the last couple of years of this war, we've seen this group of Ukrainian allies who meet every 3 months and dole out the money in little bits. It's hard to see how that situation will be improved by having a smaller group buying weapons from the United States and then passing them on to Ukraine.
Well, look, I think there's two lenses we have to keep in mind. The first and preeminent lens is what the Ukrainians need and the timeline that they need that equipment on. And since the beginning of this invasion, the Ukrainians have needed massive amounts of air defense in particular, and they've needed it yesterday. And so the priority for the Biden administration was always, how can we get equipment to the Ukrainians as quickly as possible, regardless of where it comes from? The Biden administration prioritized drawing down equipment from U.S. stocks because that was the quickest way to get Ukraine the weapons it needed. And so that lens remains. What is the equipment we can get Ukraine on the timeline that they need it, which is always immediately. But the second lens we have to keep in mind is that this administration, the Trump administration, came into office not interested in providing any more donations, any new donations to Ukraine. And so in that sense, the announcements that we heard today, the willingness from this administration to provide new systems of air defense to the Ukrainians is a positive step forward. Would it have been more ideal to continue those drawdowns that the Biden administrations had carried out on the faster timelines that it was needed? Absolutely. But I do think that this is a positive development for this administration and for a president that has clearly grown tired of negotiating with President Putin.
And so if this is, as I understand it, this is individual countries buying these weapons from US weapons stocks and then, as I say, passing them on to Ukraine, what is NATO's role, therefore, within that?
So I think one of the mechanisms currently under consideration is whether NATO could actually devise a new account, a new fund that allies could pay into that NATO could then use for purchasing these American stocks. That would be new for NATO. This would be a new role for NATO to take on. NATO currently coordinates the delivery of military assistance from allies to Ukraine, but to date, NATO has not taken a financing or a pooling of funds approach to procuring Ukrainian military assistance. So this would be new, but there are mechanisms, for example, this fund that I mentioned that Ukraine could stand up for allies to pay into.
OK, let's look at how things stand then between the US and Ukraine, because we've gone from that fiery exchange at the White House to Donald Trump just last week saying, no, you can't have any weapons, even the weapons that we've promised you, to today saying, oh, you can have them because someone else is paying for them. Have US-Ukrainian relations turned a corner?
So I would say Ukrainians are cautiously optimistic at the announcements today. U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, is in Kyiv meeting with Zelensky, Defense Minister Umerov. And I think those meetings have been productive. Again, this is a positive turn in U.S.-Ukrainian relations. But as you mentioned, there has been a seesaw approach to this relationship throughout the last several months of this administration. And I wouldn't be surprised if this relationship, the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship, still has more turns that it can take. I'm very reluctant to call this a strategic shift in the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship, but this is certainly a positive development in this administration's lifeline with the Ukrainians.
I suppose we'll have to wait and see if this administration matches deeds with its words. But given where we are now, do you think Vladimir Putin perhaps has overplayed his hand with this president?
So on the other hand of the U.S. providing military assistance to Ukraine has been this question of whether the administration, whether President Trump is interested and willing to enact higher costs on Russia and on President Putin for its continued aggression. We have not seen this administration carry out and enact higher costs on Russia. The announcement from the president today that there is a 50-day timeline by which the administration perhaps will implement 100% secondary sanctions on countries that buy Russian oil and energy materials. That is a big step, but this is something that we've yet to see whether this administration will enact. It sounds like we've got a 50-day timeline, but on enacting higher costs on Russia, we have yet to see this administration carry those out.
All right. And now, of course, that's in addition to this bill going through Congress, these sledgehammer sanctions against Russia. Is there bipartisan support for that? And how damaging is that likely to be for Moscow if passed?
That's right. So separate from the president's announcement today of these potential 100% sanctions, there is a significant sanctions bill working its way through Capitol Hill that currently has 85 co-sponsors, so bipartisan support for 500% sanctions, secondary sanctions on countries that purchase Russian oil. This could have immense implications for the global economy, for energy markets, and I think something that the administration is taking a very close eye on. We'll see whether the White House decides to support those sledgehammer sanctions, as you called them, but those would be much more significant in nature to what the president is proposing today.
OK, thanks for talking us through that so clearly. Torrey Taussig from the Atlantic Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's bring in DW correspondent and NATO expert Teri Schultz in Brussels. Welcome, Teri. So just explain to us how this is going to work. NATO countries paying for US weapons and then passing them on to Ukraine.
That's right, Phil. And you did say it correctly there. NATO countries, not NATO, are going to be paying for these weapons. NATO doesn't have a budget like that. So for many people, it may sound like it's the same thing shorthand, but it really isn't. What's going to happen is that European NATO allies will be buying more American weapons and sending them onto Ukraine more quickly than would have happened otherwise without Washington's blessing. Or they're going to be sending more of what they have on the ground with this commitment from the U.S. to resupply them with these items, again, more quickly than would have happened before you had President Trump on board with providing more support for Ukraine. So either way you look at it, if you're a supporter of Ukraine, and most European countries are, this is really good news because it means that not only will Washington help with the weapons flow into Ukraine, more than we've seen since President Trump took office, but that you will also be able to count these contributions against your new 5% spending pledge that was just achieved at the Hague summit. So this is really a win-win for Ukraine and for European countries who want to see more U.S. and European support flowing to Kyiv.
A lot of people are pointing to NATO's new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, as having been instrumental in this due to his relationship with Trump. Is that overstating it?
I don't think so. I think it's unquestionable that the good relationship you see between Mark Rutte and President Trump has definitely smoothed the way for this decision, as we saw at the Hague summit. Now, you may disagree with Mark Rutte's rather gratuitous treatment of President Trump, but when he took office last October, it was made clear to him that his number one job was to keep the U.S. in NATO. And I think that he's done that in a spectacular way, and everybody seems to be very happy with him. You heard President Trump today praise Mark Rutte as a star and say nothing bad about NATO. So that is something that NATO allies will really be appreciating at the moment. I would add one note, though, that I heard President Trump mention that he had said to First Lady Melania Trump that he just had a conversation with President Putin, and that Melania had said, yeah, well, he just bombed another Ukrainian city. So she may have had something to do with this change of heart as well, as that probably hit a nerve with President Trump.
Right. So how will today's developments, will they make any sort of long-term difference to the way NATO countries approach Russia's war on Ukraine?
I think it will because, again, you now have Washington's backing for providing more weapons to Ukraine instead of hearing every day that Washington was retreating, pulling back its support for these operations. In fact, you have Boris Pistorius today at the Pentagon talking to Pete Hegseth about buying 2 Patriot missile defense systems for Ukraine. That cannot be done without the permission of the U.S. government as the manufacturer. So this is really going to speed things up for any country that wanted to supply more for Ukraine. I'm sure in Kyiv that they're just really relieved at this decision. They've been asking for more air defense. That's really the thing they're hoping to get soon. And there are a lot of countries that have at least pieces of Patriot missile defense systems, for example, that now will have Washington's blessing to send those on to Kyiv and be reassured that they will then be backed up with new supplies of these weapons coming from the United States. I really think that, and it was described to me by one of my sources at NATO as a really big positive change for Ukraine. This is a big deal, he said.
OK, thanks for that, Teri. Teri Schultz in Brussels.